watching Goal Line Extended, presented by Lacrosse Flash.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Goal Line Extended on the Lacrosse Flash Podcast Network. Today is Tuesday, May 11, and I am your host, Ryan Holzbus. Glad that you could join us in the wake of Conference Championship Weekend and the NCAA Selection Show, which unveiled the 2021 men's and women's lacrosse brackets for the NCAA Division I tournaments. May Madness is officially underway, and it continues this weekend for round one, and Harrison Silcox is standing by. We'll be looking back at those conference championships results, assessing some of the automatic qualifiers, and offering our immediate thoughts on the selection committee's bracket. And then after Harrison and I are finished up, we here at Lacrosse Flash and Goal Line Extended will be kicking off our PLL team previews ahead of the 2021 season. 8 teams and 8 shows, and a member of our Lacrosse Flash team has been assigned one of the 8 lacrosse clubs, similar to how we did it for the entry in college drafts, and they will each be joining us here on the show as we get closer to the start of the season, accompanied by a guest in that show from the team that we are covering that day, and we'll be previewing what to watch going into training camp at the end of May and the 2021 season, except for today's show, as we do not have a guest lined up for today. But today we are starting with the expansion team, the Cannons, and Lacrosse Flash Editor-in-Chief Austin Owens will be joining me in a little bit to predict their Week 1 25-man roster in Boston. So a big show and a big week, a big weekend ahead as I welcome in the man trailing me by 3 games in our Goal Line Extended Twitter picks for the conference championship, Harrison Silcox, to today's show. What's going on, my man? And how does it feel to be looking at me on that leaderboard trailing by just a few picks?
I tell you what, I tweeted this out. I think you're copying my picks. I think something's going on. I think Mackie and I are tied. And
Mackie are tied right now for second. There are a few. The other 3 people follow. The other 3 guys follow you there. But yeah, you and Mackie currently sitting at 2 and 3.
Mackie and I are tied for first because I think you're taking a combination of her and I's picks because it just doesn't make any sense. At one point, you were like 7 and 1. Something's going on here.
I did have a real hot start, and then I believe it was the CAA semifinals. I took Delaware, and I took whoever Drexel beat. Can it come to my mind right now? Not coming to my mind. Whoever Drexel beat, or UMass. I took UMass, and I took Delaware there. I thought that CAA semifinal kind of hurt me there in the loss column, but definitely I'm not taking your picks. I mean, I am possibly typing everybody else's picks in first, then making my selection, but that is a conversation for another day. Our picks will continue into this weekend as we enter into the first round of the tournament. So make sure to follow Goal Line Extended on Twitter as we have a pretty tight race, like I said, and then a ton of games to be played. So definitely a lot of room to maneuver, and maneuvering could be going out on a limb and selecting a few upsets this weekend in the first round, particularly among the 5 conference champions that punched their ticket to this tournament by way of that automatic qualification. And that is where we will begin our discussion for today. But before we start, let me do a quick overview of the bracket for reference as we go through the games. And Harrison and I will be offering our thoughts towards the end of the segment. But at the top part of the bracket, UNC was awarded the 1 seed. They will host Monmouth. Lehigh, the Patriot League champ by default after Loyola was forced to back out due to a positive COVID test ahead of Sunday's game. They hold the 8 seed and will take on Rutgers, the second team in the tournament representing the Big Ten. And then as the 5 seed, Georgetown will play Syracuse in College Park on Saturday night, and Virginia, the 4 seed, will host Bryant. And on the other side of the bracket, Duke, the 2 seed, they will play High Point for the second time this season. Denver, as the 7 seed, will host Loyola, who gets an at-large bid over Patriot League rival Army. Undefeated Maryland, the Big Ten champions, they will host America East champion Vermont as the 3 seed, and Notre Dame as a 6 seed will play the CAA champ Drexel. And more on the bracket in a little bit, but let's start our conference championship review of the weekend. On Friday afternoon, Asher Knowlton and High Point were able to punch their ticket to the tournament with an 11-8 win over Richmond. The Panthers got to an early 7-1 lead. Lynchburg transfer and Inside Lacrosse D3 Player of the Year, Kevin Rogers, he scored 4 goals and an assist, and Davis Sampier, he won 17 of 22 faceoffs, and he gets them a rematch with the co-ACC champs as they win the rematch with the Richmond Spiders. They're going to be taking on the Duke Blue Devils, who put up 27 goals on the Panthers defense back in March. Harrison, what do you like here for High Point going into this rematch with Duke?
For High Point, I mean, just obviously the momentum that comes with winning your conference championship. I really like Kevin Rogers for this team. I think he's been an awesome transfer that they brought in, D3 Player of the Year. If anything, it shows kind of the nation what talent is at some of those other divisions in D2 and D3. The thing I look at here for High Point, the first matchup, Duke won 27-8. It wasn't particularly close. Asher Nolting's the guy who kind of gets a lot of headlines for this team, but one thing that is a knock on his game is the turnovers. And so can High Point take care of the ball? Can Nolting limit those turnovers? And can Kevin Rogers kind of continue the momentum that he found in the conference championship game into the NCAA tournament? But the real problem here for High Point is going to be, how do you stop this Duke offense? Clearly, they had problems trying to stop Duke the first time they played. Obviously, they almost let up 30 goals. So how do they do that? We know Duke's going to get possessions with Naso at the face-off X. So it's going to be an uphill battle for sure for High Point. But this is what Torpy has done as the head coach of this program. He schedules these types of teams in Dukes and North Carolinas, Virginias, the ACC teams, gears them up for the conference tournament. And so here they are, well seasoned, deep into the postseason now as we get ready to hit the NCAA tournament. And maybe they're a little bit more experienced. Maybe they're ready to go for this one. But it's going to be a tough battle if High Point wants to pull off that upset.
High Point coming into this one, as you said, have already played a few ACC teams, this season. So definitely weathered for the storm. Let's look over at the MAC and the NEC as they both held their finals on Saturday afternoon. And in both games, just like in the SoCon the day before, the 1 seed ends up falling in the MAC. Monmouth defeated Manhattan 14-9, earning them their second NCAA tournament trip in program history. And Bryant knocked off St. Joe's in the NEC title game, and they managed to get as high as 13 on the bracket rankings. And they will face Virginia as Monmouth will head to North Carolina to face the Tar Heels. And in the America East and in the CAA, the 2 seeds prevail as Monmouth was also a 2 seed in the MAC, but Vermont wins the America East and Drexel the CAA, earning them the 14 and 11 spots and the chance to play Maryland and Notre Dame respectively. Harrison, which one of these 2 teams of these quote-unquote mid-majors did you enjoy watching over the weekend the most, and who do you think could make the most noise come this weekend and the tournament?
I really think it's Vermont, and I think a lot of people kind of share that thought with me as well. Vermont at times this year, I've talked about them a lot being on GLE, just how much of a fun team they are to watch. And then they really hit their groove when they got into the America East tournament. Maryland falls to the 3 seed, which not a whole lot of people were expecting when the bracket was finally released yesterday. And this is going to be Maryland's first test outside of conference play. Vermont, they go through a dogfight of a conference in the America East. They come out on top. They've got some guys in Michael McCormick, Thomas McConvey, who kind of headline that offense. And they could do a lot of really fun things. They could make some noise and maybe give Maryland a bit of run for their money because, like I said, the Terps are used to playing the Big Ten brand of lacrosse. And they finished the season 12-0, but maybe they're worn out a little bit. They have had some closer games here down the stretch of the season, not to mention their biggest rival, the sport's biggest rivalry by many standards, playing Hopkins 3 times in 1 year, including the last one in a game that was emotionally heated for the conference championship. So Maryland grinded out kind of toward the end of the season. They do finish 12-0. I do think that they're a really good team, and I think that they'll beat Vermont. But if there's one of these mid-majors that I do like to pull off an upset, it is Vermont over Maryland.
Vermont coming in off, as you said, a very, very tough season, a tough conference schedule that they mainly played, as well as a few out-of-conference games. And then that conference tournament had to beat Stony Brook and then Albany to win that conference. And then, again, getting that automatic qualifier and the chance to play Maryland here in the tournament. We'll see if one of these lower seeds can make some noise here in the tournament. Historically, though, not something that we usually see, as over the past 3 tournaments, we haven't seen an upset of one of the top 5 seeds in the first round, so something to watch for. Heading into this weekend as a few of those teams make their first NCAA tournament appearances in program history. And then Friday evening saw a pair of Patriot League semifinals, and they turned out to be the last of the Patriot League action of this season, as Lehigh, the top seed, punched their ticket to the final with a win over Colgate, and Loyola held on over Army. However, Loyola reported a positive COVID-19 test the morning of the championship game, which forced them to withdraw it and concede the championship to Loyola. However, both teams make the to Lehigh, excuse me. However, both teams make the tournament, which in reality works out for both of them as they'll be playing again this weekend. Lehigh against Rutgers, Loyola out in Denver. Heading into this weekend, what do you like about these two Patriot League teams, especially Loyola, despite not being able to play this championship game, but they're coming in off 4 straight wins? What do you like about these two teams?
For Lehigh, I like their face-off game. I like their defense as well. But I am a little bit nervous just in how they finished the year. The first half of the season, I felt Lehigh, they were just really rolling with some momentum. They also got a big win against Army somewhere in there. Sisselberger really came onto the scene as the best face-off guy in the country. And I think he's kind of stayed that way as the year's gone on. But, that loss to Villanova that wasn't particularly close to close out the season, then kind of a bit of a close game against Colgate. They had earlier toward the end of the season as well. They had a close game against Lafayette. So Lehigh doesn't quite have that same momentum and spark that people kind of held this team to, or what I felt like when I was watching them at the beginning of the year. And for them to draw Rutgers is going to be really tough because that is a high power offense. And Rutgers, it's the same thing as Maryland in that matchup, is just first time not playing a Big Ten lacrosse game. But for Lehigh, I am a little bit concerned about just how they finish the year. This is the time where you want to be playing your best lacrosse. They kind of had some close games down the stretch there in that loss to Villanova. But for Loyola, the Greyhounds live to fight another day. I really was surprised to see them get into the tournament. And that's not to say that they don't deserve to be there because they were playing their absolute best lacrosse in the season before that positive COVID test that forced them to forfeit the Patriot League championship. So, I'm glad that these players, the senior class, that they get to, live to fight another day and in the big tournament. And if they can carry that momentum into this game against Denver, that could be huge because you look at the face-off duo that Denver has, the experience with the Yale transfers that they've brought over, some of the athletes that Tierney has on that squad like Jack Hanna. If Loyola can compete with them, which I think they can, considering what their last handful of games have looked like leading up to this, I think that could be a really fun matchup between the 7-seed Denver and Loyola.
We've been talking a lot about Loyola this season, especially on this show. Kind of their inconsistency. They would have a great game, especially that 24-goal game against Bucknell, and I believe the week after, I believe it was Towson, they were held to like 6 or 7 goals in a loss. So kind of just that up and down from Loyola. We're seeing towards the end of this season, this last couple weeks, this stretch, Loyola has been playing some really good lacrosse, as you're saying, their best lacrosse. So they get a big win over Georgetown last weekend in the last regular season game of the season for both teams, and now they'll take on the other Big East giant, Denver, as they grab one of those at-large bids in the tournament in a ranking as well for the Pioneers, and they'll host this first round after losing to Georgetown, who also will host a tournament game as they are the 5 seed. They win their 3rd straight Big East title behind 3 goals from Dylan Hess and a 3-assist game from Graham Bundy Jr. and Owen McElroy made 15 saves. Denver will host Loyola as the 7 seed. Georgetown as the 5 seed will host Syracuse, a team that I did not think was going to get in. I was hoping, like I said before, to see another Big East team like a Villanova get the nod, but Georgetown and Denver coming into the tournament fresh off an exciting Big East final.
Yeah, they are. 2 teams that really, throughout the season, they were the top 2 teams in the Big East, kind of trading positions. And I thought Villanova might be able to pull off the upset there in that conference tournament, maybe get to the championship game. But it was fitting that it was between those 2 teams, fitting that it was a 1-goal game. And then, Georgetown, a really tough draw against Syracuse. I personally myself don't think that Syracuse deserved to be in the tournament, and I'm sure we'll get into that further down the line. But for Georgetown, people thought the 5 seed, they weren't really expecting them to be that high. And then when the other end of the bracket comes through, they got to play Syracuse, a team that definitely has a high ceiling of how they can play. They can definitely compete with any one of these teams, no matter the seed, in this bracket. So that's a really tough matchup that Georgetown's going to get in the first round. As a lacrosse fan, I'm excited for it. But after coming off against a really just kind of grinded out game, tough game against Denver, a 1-goal game, took the 4th quarter to decide that game. Now Georgetown's got to gear up and have to play one of those ACC teams, which a lot of people regard as the best team in college lacrosse this season. And then for Denver, I mean, how many years are we going to see Denver get upset in this Big East conference? How many years in a row they haven't won the conference since 2015? And it seems like they're going into every season, they're kind of a heavy favorite to win the conference. Now, Georgetown this year, we obviously knew they were good for a while. But, yeah, Denver just can't seem to get it done in the conference tournaments of late. But that's not a knock. I mean, they're still a really good team. Kind of talked about what Loyola can bring into that matchup. But I think Tierney has a really unique team this year, and the transfers that he got because of how 2020 ended with guys like Jackson Morrill coming over from Yale. He's got some experience to go with a lot of these really athletic guys. I mean, he's got some Final Four experience on that roster now to go with guys who have been in the tournament but haven't quite had that same dramatic run that, Tierney had back in 15, I believe, when they won the national championship. So, there's some athletes on this team with mentioned Morrill, Ethan Walker, Alex Simmons, Jack Hanna, Lucas Kotler. So a lot of firepower in this Denver offense. Them losing the Big East isn't the end of the world. And just two tough games that Georgetown and Denver drew here to start, but could be really fun.
Denver trying to get back, as you're saying, to the NCAA, trying to get into the Final Four again. They've, as you said, haven't won a conference championship in the Big East since 2015. I believe 2016 was that loss to Marquette. 2017, I think, was that down year for Denver. They did not even qualify for the NCAA tournament. And then as just 2018, 2019, losing to Georgetown in the Big East final. Georgetown also, if you look at Georgetown, they get the 5 seed, but you look at Notre Dame, who's the 6 seed, they get Drexel as the 11 seed opposed to Syracuse. So Georgetown kind of drawing the short straw there, but Georgetown and Syracuse Saturday night at 7:30 Eastern, Denver and Loyola Sunday night at 7:30 Eastern. So both Big East teams on primetime television this weekend. And like I said, I was pushing for Villanova to get a nod here. Obviously, playing that conference-only schedule for the most part hurt them, but that win over Lehigh last weekend, that was Lehigh's first and only of the season so far, as we brought up before. So I was hoping that win might have been enough to get them an at-large bid, but it goes to Syracuse. And then speaking of at-large bids, for a minute there on Saturday afternoon, Johns Hopkins had us thinking that we could possibly see 2 teams from the Big Ten get at-large bids, as they had a lead on Maryland, but then went on a scoreless stretch that stretched throughout most of the second half. Maryland able to get the win 12-10. They stayed undefeated, but fall to the 3 seed in this tournament. They'll face the America East champ Vermont and Rutgers with 2 regular season losses to Maryland. They lost to Johns Hopkins in the Big Ten semifinal, and then an otherwise perfect record in their 2021 Big Ten schedule. They get the 9 seed and will play Loyola in round 1. These 2 Big Ten teams looking to make some noise in this tournament, but the talk has been all spring that the quality of play is down in the Big Ten this season. Arguments being made that Rutgers isn't that good or as good as some of us think. People are trying to say that Maryland had to, if they were to venture out of conference into maybe the ACC or the Big East, that maybe they might take a loss. So a chance here for both of these teams to prove those doubters wrong, but they need to first get out of this first round.
Yeah, definitely. Get out of the first round and prove some of the doubters wrong. And I think it's fair criticism to say the Big Ten was down this year, but I don't think that's fair criticism to knock the argument for the talent that is on Maryland and Rutgers, right? I have no reason to doubt Rutgers this year. Yeah, they lost to Johns Hopkins, but Hopkins was a team, they had absolutely nothing to lose going into that tournament. They kind of hit their stride at the right time. But outside, we know Rutgers is good. We know the goaltending there is good. We know the midfield is strong as well as the attack there. You could go on and on with the offensive talent on that team. And the same goes for Maryland, but it's crazy to say here in this 2021 season that they still have some people to prove wrong. Clearly, Maryland probably wants to prove the selection committee wrong a little bit. I was shocked that Maryland fell to the 3 seed. That's crazy to me that, and I understand they almost lost to Hopkins a couple times down the stretch, a couple close games later in the year. But Maryland went 12-0. You know how hard that is to do when you're playing conference opponents. You're playing each one of them twice. And these conferences are so small in lacrosse that a lot of these games probably develop their own rivalries to begin with. I'm always going to be drawn to Maryland versus Ohio State, Maryland versus Rutgers, Maryland versus Hopkins, Maryland versus Penn State. Those are all big games, no matter how many times you play each other. So I don't understand knocking Maryland back as the 3 seed when all they did was win 12 straight games in 2021 and lose none. That's crazy to me. But a chance to, yes, prove this selection committee wrong. Maryland's been a 3 seed plenty of times. They've actually gotten to the semifinals quite a bit since they've been a 3 seed. So they did get a tough matchup. We mentioned how Vermont could have Maryland on an upset alert a little bit. But yeah, kind of a chip on their shoulder mentality maybe for both of these Big Ten teams, Rutgers too, and thinking, hey, people don't respect this as much as we wanted to. And Rutgers, I mentioned the talent that they have there between Connor Kirst, Charlon Beatties, Kieran Mullins, and then you've got Colin Kirsten Net. I mean, the Kirst brothers have been awesome this year for Rutgers. And it's going to be tough for them to go against Lehigh, obviously, with the faceoffs and the defense that Lehigh brings to the table. But yeah, I mean, don't sleep on these Big Ten teams just because they played that only conference schedule. I think the Big Ten was a little bit weak this year, but does that mean Rutgers and Maryland aren't as good? I completely disagree with that logic.
Maryland falling a few spots to number 3 as the 2 ACC champions rise up to 1 and 2. Definitely, like we were saying, somewhat a chip on Maryland's shoulder, hopefully going to this tournament. But North Carolina, really the true ACC champ after their win over Duke last weekend. They get the 1 seed and draw MAC champ Monmouth, and Duke grabs the 2 seed ahead of UND and will welcome a rematch with SoCon champ High Point, as we talked about before. And then some more shuffling with the next 2 teams. Virginia is all the way up to number 4, and Notre Dame falls to 6, farther than I think any of us had them pegged, and I don't think any of us had Virginia up at 4 that high either. What do you think led the committee to slot Virginia up ahead of the Irish, and then even to put Notre Dame behind Georgetown, something else that I think you could have swapped as well? I know a committee member mentioning the quality of Notre Dame's outside or out of conference schedule being a something that they brought up. What do you take away from these committee rankings?
My biggest thing with the committee rankings, and I'll kind of narrow it down to the ACC teams a little bit as I go on, but most of the selections, most of the teams they put in the tournament made sense to me, but it was just where they seeded teams that kind of left me scratching my head a little bit. I'm not sure why Notre Dame didn't fall back to 6. I personally thought Notre Dame should have been the 4 seed in this tournament. I understand why you slot Virginia ahead of them because the head-to-head there. Virginia did also have a little bit more of a challenging non-conference schedule, and the committee apparently valued that when they looked at what Notre Dame did, where mostly home games, not a super strong non-conference schedule for the Irish. So I understand why Virginia jumps them. In my mind, Notre Dame's 2 blowout wins over Syracuse and that win against Duke trump the head-to-head. But, I mean, those teams, you can flip-flop them. Georgetown jumping Notre Dame was very curious to me. I know that you could knock Notre Dame's non-conference schedule, but also look at their ACC schedule. They played Duke twice. They played Syracuse twice. They split the matchup against Duke. In that same weekend, they went and played North Carolina, and they narrowly lost to North Carolina. They blew out Syracuse twice, a 1-goal loss to Virginia. I don't think that that's much of a knock to put Notre Dame. I don't think that's enough to bump them back to the 6 behind Georgetown. I think when you see that matchup, though, Notre Dame taking on Drexel, if they would have been at 5, they'd be playing Syracuse for a 3rd time this season. And it's hard to beat a team three straight times. Just ask Maryland, who had to do it against Johns Hopkins, and Rutgers, who couldn't do it against Johns Hopkins the game before that, or even Ohio State against Michigan. So I think Notre Dame, when you look at that matchup, probably works out a little bit better for them. And it could lead to a really fun quarterfinal against Maryland, assuming Maryland beats Vermont. I understand why, North Carolina won, Duke 2. That makes perfect sense to me. But the kind of bumping down of Notre Dame to 6 was just really confusing to me, especially when they end their season putting up 22 goals against Syracuse. A 22-8 win against Syracuse gets them up to 4th-ranked team in the country, and Georgetown jumped them somehow. That left me scratching my head for sure.
Yeah, Maryland falling to 3. Definitely can see UNC as 1, but I expected UNC, Maryland, then Duke, and then as you're saying with Notre Dame, I did not see them falling all the way to 6. I guess could have Virginia ahead of them, but then again, as you're saying, I like Notre Dame there ahead of Virginia, but he goes North Carolina 1, Duke 2, Maryland slots in as the 3rd seed, and then Virginia 4. They will host Bryant, the NEC champion, and Notre Dame will travel out to Denver to play the Drexel Dragons. And then the 5th ACC team in the tournament, Syracuse, snagging the final at-large bid, the 12th seed, following their win over Robert Morris on Friday and following the news that Chase Scanlon had been arrested after the incidents reported over the last few weeks, as we continue to watch that situation unfold and the legal process play out. But Syracuse snags a bid and they get a tough one. Georgetown in College Park in prime time is going to be an exciting one. But how much optimism do you have for Cuse heading into this weekend?
So as much as I don't think Syracuse deserved, I don't think they had the resume to get into this tournament, but I still have a lot of optimism on them. I'm not like a hating on Syracuse. I don't think they're a bad team. I just think, 4 blowout losses. One of them was a non-conference at home to Army, at home against North Carolina, at home against Notre Dame, and then again against Notre Dame. And both those matchups against North Carolina and the second one against Notre Dame, they gave up over 20 goals, and they didn't hit double digits themselves. Like, it was not an impressive year to finish 7-5 for Syracuse. I think that most teams, if they finish 7-5 and last in their conference with 4 blowout losses, no matter who the opponent is, I don't think that's enough to get them in the tournament. So I was surprised Syracuse got in. Well, maybe not surprised. I just don't think that they deserve to get in with the resume. But I am really optimistic on the Orange in this tournament because, I think they hear what people are saying. They know what the guy like, me on this podcast, they've heard the echo chambers, and the Twitter and everything. Like, the players have seen it. And so I think that they are wanting to prove a lot of doubters wrong and to kind of show their fan base is like, hey, we're this team and we think that we can make a run to championship weekend. I think they want to prove a lot of doubters wrong as well. I mean, this was a team that, keep in mind, some people in the preseason rankings had them first in the country over Duke.
Number one of everybody.
And they were picked to win the ACC despite Duke being the preseason number 1 team in the country. So the talent is there. We know that they have the stars on midfield. We know that they have guys like Rafis in at attack. And to be honest, against Robert Morris, I thought Syracuse looked pretty good. I mean, Sebald looked good filling in for Chase Scanlon, who you just mentioned a while ago. So they definitely have the ability to knock off a team like Georgetown and maybe even make a run to the Final Four. I don't want to go that far, but I am optimistic that they're going to give Georgetown a run for their money. My biggest concern, though, remains in Syracuse defense. We know the offense is good, but it's that defense that has particularly struggled in a lot of games this season. And I know they put up over 20 against Robert Morris, but I mean, Ryan Smith also had 7 goals. How about that for the Chaos fans? But Smith had 7 goals, and Robert Morris put up 14. And I mean, Georgetown is going to get their looks. They're going to get their opportunities. How is Syracuse going to match up? How are they going to defend cutters off ball? And then how does Porter play in cage? I think if Porter's getting, low angle shots thrown his way, if that's what the Syracuse defense can force, then they can keep this game close enough where they can pull off an upset against Georgetown. So I am optimistic on the Orange, despite me absolutely disagreeing with them being in the tournament.
Syracuse, definitely the one glaring thing that we've been pointing out all season is that the defensive struggles there for the Orange. So we'll see if they continue here into the first round. But Harrison, I appreciate your knowledge every time you join me on this show as we look ahead to the men's NCAA tournament. Any final thoughts here on the bracket in round 1 before I let you go and welcome in Austin Owens?
My final thoughts, watching Denver and Duke in the first round, if those 2 teams win, you get a really exciting face-off matchup there with Stathakis and T.D. Erlin and then Naso, the freshman at Duke. And then my last thought is somebody else has got to, we need some sort of watchdog on you, Ryan, for the picks, because I'm telling you, you are stealing picks so you can keep that lead. I know what you're doing. I'm behind this. I'm going to talk to some people in the Lacrosse Flash group chat, the Slack chat, whatever you want to call it. We're going to figure it out. We're going to get to the bottom of it, and we're going to make sure that these picks are done the right way.
I got you. I'll definitely be making sure I submit my picks ahead of time. I'll make sure I find one of you guys as you send me your picks. I'll make sure I send out mine to make sure we have it all squared away. But Harrison, appreciate you joining me as always. Always a pleasure having you on as we look at back at last weekend's conference championship action and then ahead to a big weekend of NCAA tournament lacrosse. Harrison's official picks will be out on Twitter ahead of this weekend's games. Make sure to follow along at GL Extended to see who he and I are going to pick. Maybe I'll follow him here with a couple of these teams that he submits into me, but we will see. Liam Kelly will be back on Friday to look ahead to the tournament with me, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Harrison, thank you again, my man. Austin Owens will be joining me next, so do not go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Watching Goal Line Extended, presented by Lacrosse Flash.
Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Ryan Holtzbus, and Austin Owens is with me as well, Lacrosse Flash Editor-in-Chief, as we kick off our 2021 PLL team previews ahead of training camp in the 2021 season. We'll be doing this for each team ahead of the league's third season. And today, we are going to start with the expansion team, the Cannons, fresh off a trade, 18 expansion draft picks, 3 entry draft selections, 2 college draft picks, and a few more trades and a flurry of waiver wire pickups. A total of 32 players heading into training camp. Coach Quirk needing to get down to 25 before June 4, and that's what we are going to be looking at today as Austin Owens joins me. Austin, what's going on, my friend?
Ryan, happy Monday, sir, or happy Tuesday. We are recording this on a Monday.
We're recording this on a Monday, show going out on Tuesday. But hey, a big Monday of lacrosse news as we got some news from the NLL here. Before we get into this Cannons preview, the Saskatchewan Rush, they have been sold by owner Bruce Urban to the Priestner Sports Corporation, led by Mike Priestner, most likely solidifying the Rush in Saskatchewan for the foreseeable future. What does this move mean for the Rush in the league as a whole, especially for the fans here of the Saskatchewan Rush?
Honestly, the news sort of came out of nowhere for me. Ian Duffy, I believe, from Global Saskatoon, I believe, broke it first. But just looking at the deal, it's not a bad one, obviously. I believe the Priestners own the Saskatoon Blades, which is the Western Hockey League team out there. They share an arena with the Saskatchewan Rush junior hockey team out in Canada, for all of those who don't know. And just a very, I'm not too versed, obviously, in the history of the Saskatchewan Rush, just being from out east, but Bruce Urban obviously brought this team and turned them into one of the modern dynasties in the National Lacrosse League. Just coming over from Edmonton, Saskatchewan won 3 championships in 4 years, had that one blip in 2017 where Georgia won it. But even then, they were in the finals. So they're honestly one of the flagship organizations in the NLL and one of the teams that regularly, I mean, when they came to Saskatchewan, they had 15,000 fans in the stands, season ticket holders consistently. So they're one of those teams that you just look at and they are synonymous with the NLL. So like you said, just keeping them in Saskatchewan was huge. They are going to be a big market and a big team as the NLL tries to draw fans back into the stands in 2021. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what the new ownership does and what kind of moves they make around the team. Obviously, Derek Keenan has moved into the GM role. He was the coach of the team. So that'll be kind of interesting. There's been a bit of a turnover. And they'll have a full offseason, I believe, to sort of figure out what they want to do here going forward into the fall season.
Very excited to see what the Rush can do here come the start of the 2021-22 season and going forward. Under new leadership, one of the most successful franchises on the field and in terms of average attendance in the NLL over the past couple of seasons. So definitely happy to be welcoming fans back into the stands. Hopefully come December of this season, they'll be staying put in Saskatchewan. The Rush will most likely be staying, Yes, the Rush will most likely be staying in Saskatchewan long term, but the Rock, who have played in Toronto since 1999, are doing the opposite, as the team will be moving back to Hamilton, where the franchise started in 1998 under a different name. Austin, you're from this area up in Canada. What's your reaction to this news, and how does it affect the Rock and the NLL looking ahead a few years down the line here?
I cannot lie to you, Ryan. I obviously being from Toronto and coming up in lacrosse, this Toronto Rock games were a part of my childhood. I cover the team now. I was a season ticket holder for the team back in the day. It's a little gutting, honestly, for somebody from the city, but at the same time, you can't argue with what Jamie Dawick has done for this organization. He picked them up in 2010. Immediately, they went to back-to-back Champions Cups, and they won the championship in 2011. It's their last title they won since they were probably the dynasty of the 2000s once they moved over to Toronto. But you know what? From taking away from sort of the bias I have being from Toronto or the Toronto area, Hamilton's a good spot for them. It's, like you said, where the organization started as the Ontario Raiders in 98 before they moved to Toronto. A group that included Brad Waters, Bobby Orr, Ty Domi, or some Canadian legends, Toronto legends for sure. Bobby Orr, Boston legend, obviously from the Bruins. But it's tough because you just saw Philadelphia a couple of years ago move their organization to New England and has since moved to Albany this offseason. And Toronto, who they are tied with for the most championships in NLL history, both those franchises have now moved to different cities. So it's kind of one of those things that we've seen in the NLL over the last couple of years and over just sort of the last couple of decades is sustainability is kind of hard in some markets when it comes to the NLL, which is just sort of a sad truth of what the league is. And that's a story for a different day. But Toronto moving to Hamilton sort of, it helps the cost, I think, with the Scotiabank Arena in Toronto is probably one of the the richest arenas, I should say, in Canada, and it's definitely not cheap to have floor time there. So I'm just speculating at this point, but if it's something like that and top of player salaries, it wouldn't have been easy for Jamie Dawick, but he's built the Toronto Rock Athletic Facility. It's one of the only facilities that actually allows an NLL team to have a home practice facility and a place where players can go and train and do all of that. So is it gutting a little bit for the fans? Yes. Will it be a transition period for the Rock? Yes. They probably will lose some fans that can't make the trip out west from the East Coast. I know I'm from the east side of Toronto, or the east side of sort of on the Ontario GTA spectrum. So it's going to be tough on a lot of people, but at the same time, Hamilton, and I'm sorry, I'm going a little long-winded because this is the team I cover. Hamilton has a really, really good track record. The CFL, for example, the Tiger Cats are one of the highest grossing attendance numbers in the league. So if the community gets behind them, they could do a really good job here. And I think the First Ontario Centre it's an older arena, but it's a good arena to watch live sports in from what I've been told. I haven't seen a game there, but it should be good as long as they can get the fans to come out.
Unfortunate that your hometown team here is leaving Toronto, going out to Hamilton. But as you're saying here, hopefully, if the fan base can get behind them, something that could be good for the NLL and for the team, for the league as a whole. So something that we'll be looking forward to and watching as we head into 2021 and going forward. All right, time for our Lacrosse Flash and Goal Line Extended Cannons team preview ahead of training camp and the 2021 season. Also, we're going to start in the back and work our way up the roster. Again, the Cannons currently at 32 players, but a few guys that will remain on the roster with a designation going into the season. It's actually two guys that will be unofficially on the team roster, and they are Curtis Corley and Brendan Fowler, two expansion draft selections by Coach Quirk. Corley will be on the league's holdout list, most likely unavailable for the season, and Fowler will start the year on the league's injury list, and Fowler's loss, not a huge one. Kirk goes into the season with his other two expansion draft selections at faceoff, Drew Simoneau and Tommy Kelly, and then we'll hope to see Fowler at some point this season. And then the goalies. Coach Quirk told us back in March after the entry draft that he sees Nick Morocco being the goalie for this team for years to come, hopefully. And then a guy in Jake Stover that Quirk got an expansion. We had Whipsnake's head coach Jim Stagnita on Friday's show, and he had nothing but good things to say about Stover as his former backup goalie, a backup in the role, just a goalie in general, and then as a locker room and sideline supporter. So Morocco in goal, and then the Simoneau-Kelly tandem. How do you think they fare come this season?
I am we were obviously a little bit shocked when the Cannons took 3 face-off guys in the expansion draft. We expected 1, maybe 2, but 3 was a little interesting because there's no way you're carrying 3 guys on a game roster that play the face-off specialist position. Fowler's absence is really going to make it kind of easy on Coach Quirk to sort of decide who he wants to have. It's really sort of a mixed bag when you look at it, because Tommy Kelly was last in the league last year. Chaos was last in the league last year, but I think the underlying numbers, when you look at them, he did very well at getting the clamp. He just, for whatever reason, you obviously know that faceoffs are not a one-man show. You have to have your wings sort of helping you out and getting ground balls. So I think that played a factor, and I think he'll have a bounce back this year. Drew Simoneau, big season with Jake Withers, I'd like to say. Sorry, I'm a little jumbled on the draw guys because I'm trying to figure out all these new guys in new places are sort of screwing me up.
Oh yeah.
But Drew Simoneau, I think, is an underrated face-off guy. He really showed what he could do with the Water Dogs last year, and we kind of figured that he might be the guy. I know he was the guy that we picked as our expansion pick when we did our mock expansion draft. But he'll get his chance with Kelly, and I think that'll be a really good unit. Morocco's going to be the guy in goal. I mean, we sort of knew that was happening when the entry draft happened. And Jacob Stover, I mean, you touched on it. Jim Stagnita touched on it. He said he stood in there and took his heat, and I can't imagine he's probably slinging like 108 right now. I saw the guns on the promo poster. Stags is definitely letting them fly. But when you talk about Stover, I mean, yeah, he's probably not going to see a lot of time, but big team guy. That's what we talk about here on Lacrosse Flash. We love our big team guys, and a guy that can really, provide a spark on the sideline and cheer on his teammates. And he's not a slouch. He's in the league for a reason. He can come in and be that backup goalie. And over a full season, I don't think you're going to see Morocco play all 11 games, not all fully 11 games, all 8 weeks, I should say, fully for the Cannons. So, you know what? We'll see what happens with him, but Morocco will be the guy. And we'll sort of go from there. I'm excited about both units, and I think Morocco is going to prove that he's one of the top goalies in the league, but he's got a hell of a backup behind him, in Stover, a guy that, Stags was sad to see go, and the guy that Quirk was excited to bring in.
Absolutely. Quirk definitely had to be excited to bring in Stover as well as Morocco. He did tell us back at the end of March, very excited to bring Morocco in there at the end of the third round of the entry draft, or beginning of the third round, of the entry draft. But you did mention a lot of new names on different teams, just a lot of new names in the league, kind of getting mixed up here, where everybody is currently standing. We could see some more turnover as well with the waiver period, obviously opening the Monday after week 1. But right there are our 4 specialists for the Cannons, with 1 on reserve. Let's move on to the defense, and I'm going to let you take over here. But you have Brody Merrill as the leader of that unit, alongside Jake Pulver, Holden Garland, Justin Pugel, Resetti at LSM, Tyson Bell as a short stick and LSM hybrid, and then to get some defensive midfielders as well here, Zach Goodrich, and most likely a lot of Chris Hogan, who you have included on your roster as well. How do you see this defense piecing together? And you leave off both college draft selections, most notably first-round pick Jack Keelty at defense. What was the thought process in leaving him off your list?
I hope I didn't leave Keelty off. That's going to look bad. The unit as a whole, I think Brody Merrill is going to be the leader, air quotes there. He's not going to be their number 1 matchup guy. I don't think that's fair to put on Brody at 38 or 39 years old. That's just putting him on a Jordan Wolf is not doing him justice. I think he's sort of going to run a role that I think a lot of us expect sort of a Liam Burns to run with the Water Dogs, which is sort of that third pole where you can sort of captain the defense, sort of help them out on slides, do whatever you need to do there. I think I have Keelty as sort of their top matchup defenseman, and I think he's sort of proven with Notre Dame this year that he's able to cover those top guys, whether it's a Michael Sowers, whether it's a Gray on North Carolina is who I'm thinking of. He's proven that he can be on an island with guys from X, and he can defend them and shut them down in some cases. When you look at the rest of it, I mean, the short stick defensive mids are kind of interesting. Tyson Bell and Resetti, I think, are going to be an interesting duo. I think Bell is more of a short stick D-midi, like he played with the Chaos last year. But he also, when he was with Onondaga during his collegiate career, he also played close defense. So he has experience with the 6-foot pole. He can play it. So I'm interested to see if Quirk sort of uses him in that dual role. Resetti, he was on the show. His work speaks for himself last year. He's a stud. It's just about being consistent and following up on what was last year with the Chrome. And Pulver, I mean, I think he'll be a really good 2 guy. I think that unit of Brody, Pulver, and Keelty will be really good as a trio. I'll touch on Chris Hogan in a bit because I think he's sort of his own thing. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody off the top, but I think the defensive unit, Justin Pugel's another guy that's going to be really good. Holden Garland is the guy I'm forgetting off the top of my head. He's a Canadian guy that I am very interested in seeing. Sort of a new face, a Canisius product. He is very good. And I think Joe Keegan sort of pointed out that he's very surgical is the word he used with his stick checks. He sort of lulls you into a false sense and then just throws a quick check at you and the ball's going the other way. So I think Holden is we talk about Latrell Harris a lot. I think Holden's sort of that same like high upside guy that a lot of people are going to be sleeping on. I think in my piece, I compared him to sort of like an Eli Salama with the Chrome, and he could have sort of that same impact as an under the radar guy that comes in and really wows people.
Curtis Corley on the holdout list, Chase Levesque, Scott Hooper, and midfielder Luke Anderson also not making your list. I believe you had Jack Keelty not on the list that you sent me. I might be wrong. We might have had.
Oh, I goofed it, Ryan.
Might have goofed it there.
He's in my article, but I think I this is why we don't send messages late at night.
This is why we don't send messages late at night, yes. So Jack Keelty on your list, mistake by me or mistake there in the communication. But we'll see how that defense comes together in front of Nick Morocco if this is what Coach Quirk decides to go with out of training camp. Again, we'll decide after training camp what his roster look like. So now to look at your offense, 14 players in 12 spots to fill. Let's talk about the obvious ones. Lyle Thompson, Ryan Drenner, Andrew Q, who Quirk traded for a third-round pick to obtain. We have Clark Peterson as well, and 2020 MLL MVP Bryce Wasserman, and then onto the midfield, Paul Rabel, Connor Busick, Josh Courier, and Deemer Class. They look like the main guys there offensively. How do you think this unit and expansion roster put together by head coach Sean Quirk and his staff stacks up against some of the other offenses in this league, and what should we expect to see from this group?
I'll start with the midfield, and then I will move my way to attack because there are too many names here. The offenses are so front-loaded, it was kind of like I had to leave some names off the D end because you can't say that a Deemer Class or somebody like that can't be on the roster regardless of him being out for a year. We can start with Deemer if you want. I think he's a really underrated piece and a guy that the Chaos are going to eventually sort of regret that they let go, but Andy Towers had priorities there. I think Deemer is going to be a really good piece. I think that starting midfield unit probably looks something like Deemer, Connor Busick, and Paul Rabel, which is gross offensively. I think Paul Rabel is going to have a big bounce back year. It's like when Kyle Devitt was on the show. I think he talked about Paul Rabel's shooting percentage from last year. It was only, I think, 1 of 19, 5%. And I think he was absolutely right. I think Paul would be the first to tell you that definitely wasn't up to his standards. It wasn't up to what he believed he could do. And I think he's going to have a bounce back this year. And I think you just look at that unit as a whole. There are so many different things that Sean Quirk could do with it, the way I have it laid out, at least. I'm not Sean Quirk, so this could absolutely be way off from what he has planned. But you have guys like Josh Courier who can play that attack midfield role. Chris Hogan, I have no idea what he's going to do. I think Max Tuttle is a very underrated piece because he wasn't used a lot in the the Whip Snake system. That goes to show you how little he was used and how underrated he is. I don't even remember what team he's on. This is why we shouldn't do things on Monday, Ryan. But, you look at that unit in total, and I think we could touch on Bryce Wasserman as well. I think he's a guy that might run out of the box because with the Cannons during the MLL last year, I think you saw him run from X a lot. That spot's really not going to be available at any point during the game with Lyle Thompson. So I think you run him out of the box and you have him as a dodger down the alleys or just trying to get his shot in the middle, and I think that's how he'll best be used. So Rabel's the centerpiece here, but I think the complementary unit is world-class. I know the PLL just another conversation for another day, but the PLL DraftKings dropped the PLL odds, and they have the Cannons as the worst at plus 1,500. And with this offensive unit, I think you probably bet the house on that because it's pretty good odds for a team that's this stacked up front.
Absolutely. We'll get to the championship odds in a little bit, but then those last 5 spots with 7 names left, you mentioned one of them, Max Tuttle, and then Sam Duggan. They're both young and athletic midfielders that can do a lot of different things in terms of playing offense and defense. Tuttle was actually an attackman for a little bit in college, but he's now playing for his 3rd team in 3 years. Duggan, his 2nd and 2. Adding more depth at midfield, you officially go with 9 midfielders, including Tyson Bell. So it comes down to the attack for that last spot. And I narrowed it down to the 3 names that you most likely had at the end for this final spot on your roster. The 6th attackman for the Cannons, Shane Jackson, John Upgren, and 4th round pick in the college draft out of Syracuse, Stephen Rafis. And you go with Jackson as your 25th man after Quirk dropped Brendan Gleeson a few days ago after drafting him in expansion. What led you to take Jackson over those other 2 guys?
Part Canadian bias, I would have to say. Part Shane Jackson's born in the same town as me, shout out Scarborough, Ontario. No, it's Shane Jackson was, I believe, picked up for one reason and one reason only. And I talked about it, I think, when we did our entry draft preview. And it's just the connection he has with Lyle Thompson from their time playing with the Georgia Swarm. And they've both playing together won an NLL Most Valuable Player award. And that's hard to say about a separate duo. It's usually one guy that gets sort of the headlines, I should say. But Lyle sort of draws the defense in, and I think Shane Jackson plays that role very nicely where he's sort of that, I always relate it to Jay Carlson with the Whip Snakes, where he just finds that soft spot in the defense and you forget about him. And Shane Jackson is absolutely money on the crease in the NLL, and that's with a fully padded up goaltender and a smaller net. I can't imagine how many goals he's going to pot just backdoor cuts with Lyle Thompson feeding you the ball after he draws a slide. Like, Shane Jackson's one of those guys that I think could have a massive year and really, I talk about under the radar guys already, but he could be one of those guys that really sort of sneaks up on you, sort of like a Christian Mazzone. I think he had 9 goals last year for the Archers. Like one of those guys that just always finds himself in key scoring situations. You could say that about every other guy on this team because Lyle Thompson, I don't need to say anything more about Lyle Thompson. He's the best player on earth. He's going to come in and be an instant MVP candidate in the PLL, and that's it. That's Lyle Thompson. I don't need to touch on him anymore. He's amazing. Who else can I touch on? Andrew Q is going to be unbelievable. Bryce Wasserman could be run out of the box, like we said before. I think Ryan Drenner is going to be a really, really interesting piece to watch because now I don't want to say that he was forced into a role that he can't handle with the Water Dogs, but he was forced into being the primary ball handler with the Water Dogs, which was a complete opposite from what he was with the Whip Snakes the year before. He was able to just be that Shane Jackson role. He was able to find soft spots and sort of be a catch and shoot guy and a finisher rather than having to be a facilitator. So it's not that he wasn't able to do it. It's just that with the Water Dogs, I think it was sort of unfair to assume that you could just throw him in and he could be the guy after he was sort of a complement player for the Whip Snakes. But he's going to be really interesting. Like Rabel, I think he's going to have a huge bounce back. But Lyle Thompson is the key to this offense. As big as a name as Paul Rabel is, it's Lyle Thompson. He will make this offense go, whether it's through passing, whether it's through scoring, dodging, drawing slides, getting guys open. What I said in the lead up to the Cannons is they just need to find good players that can help Lyle succeed. And they've done that. They've got Andrew Q, who's young and underrated. They've got Shane Jackson. Like I said, he's an indoor MVP. They've got all of these weapons, like the catch and shoot guys up top. You're telling me Lyle Thompson's going to dodge from X, draw a slide, and you are going to willingly leave one of Connor Bushek or Paul Rabel wide open for a step down? Go ahead.
From around the 2-point arc as well.
Just, it's like I said, this team is disgusting up front. It is. Sean Quirk has done a very good job of making sure that all his pieces are in place. The defense could use a little work, but I think Keelty is a very good piece to add in there. The goaltending is fine. The offense is stacked. And I think there's a lot of pieces that are really going to prove to people that they are more than just a name on a game sheet. They are going to be studs in this offense.
Cannons head coach Sean Quirk, along with his assistants John Klepacki and Sean Kerwin, getting this roster set before training camp in the 2021 season, trying to find impact players to lead this team alongside the notable veterans in Lyle Thompson, Paul Rabel, and Brody Merrill. Chris Hogan, where does he fit in? You have him on this 25-man roster. Do you think he makes this game roster, this 19-man game roster for Week 1 in Boston? I would have to imagine, being that he is a former New England Patriots player, 2-time Super Bowl champion. I'd have to imagine at least Week 1 he's going to be on this game roster, the 19-man.
Yeah, I would assume that at least for Week 1 he would be on the team. As for what he does the rest of the way, it'll really depend on training camp and Week 1, I would say. Chris Hogan, I put on this team, and it's going to be, I don't think it'll be a hot take by any means, because I think it's safe to say that the PLL wouldn't have done a social rollout like they did if for a guy that was going to sit in the player pool for the 2021 season. Chris Hogan was going to land somewhere. I don't know what he's going to do this year, quite honestly. We haven't seen, as far as I've seen, I haven't seen any clips of him going one-on-one with a real-life defender. It's been a lot of cone drills. It's been a lot of, obviously, the clip of him running the full field and shooting has sort of become a pretty big thing over the last couple of weeks.
Better than Will Manny dodging cones, so we'll leave it at that.
The PL has some very interesting off-season workouts, and we will leave it there. But I think, honestly, if you're Sean Quirk, you start Chris Hogan as a short stick D-midi and let him transition the ball up. I think it's unfair to Chris Hogan to throw him in there game one against the best short stick D-midis or long pole if they put a long stick midi on him in the world and expect him to actually have a good performance. I think you start him on the back end and then slowly transition him up. If that happens, I have no idea. We will have to see, but Chris Hogan, I mean, what do you want me to say about him? He's a tremendous athlete. I haven't seen him play against the best players in the world yet, and we won't see it until the June 4th weekend. So it's hard to say what he is right now. He's a tremendous athlete. That's all I can say about him. His stick skills look good. I haven't seen him against a live defender. So what you can really surmise from cone drills is very little. But I hope he does well. Nobody's cheering against him because it's a big thing for the sport having him come back after a very, very impressive NFL career. But will he be on the Cannons past week one? It's kind of hard to say at this point, but I'm hoping for the best for him. And I am secretly hoping he pots a goal. Not secretly anymore because I'm saying it on this podcast, but I'm secretly hoping he pots a goal in week one just to watch Lacrosse Twitter burn to the ground.
I'm hoping we see Chris Hogan at least be somewhat successful here, at least in the first few weeks. If he can stay on this Cannons 25-man roster throughout the season, that would be huge. And then once he plays, and if he can prove that he is still, or I guess again a professional lacrosse player, that he's able to do it, then prove the doubters wrong. Love to see that happen for Chris Hogan. But we are all very excited to see what Coach Quirk and his staff are able to do in year one with the Cannons. And like you said before, the official championship odds have been released by DraftKings, the first futures odds for this season. And without much question, the Whipsnakes are the favorites at plus 160, but the Cannons, the expansion team, are the underdogs, plus 1,500, as you mentioned before, the lowest odds of any of the 8 teams. After doing this team preview and then getting a better idea of what the Cannons might look like here in 2021, you said before you like those odds, but would you take those odds for the Cannons to go back-to-back after winning in the MLL bubble in 2020?
I don't know if I'd take, just for the sheer value, I'd say, hey, screw it, throw it on the Cannons. I think when we did our draft or our betting preview last year with Tyson and Pat, I think Pat and I both may have put our money down on the Water Dogs, who were the long favorite to win the title. That didn't work out so well for us, but it is what it is. I think the Cannons have a really good chance of making the postseason with the lineup they have. It's so damn hard to bet against those effing Whipsnakes. Like, how do you bet against that team? I don't know how, but somebody will, just for money purposes. Throwing like $10 down on the Cannons just to see what happens. Hey, why not? Anything can happen. The Chaos had the Whips number for the first half of that game, and the wheels sort of fell off to the back half. So it's a full season, so you never really know. The Whips are going to lose a game at some point this season. Clip that real quick to make sure, just so we can reference back when the Whips inevitably go undefeated and win the title.
They haven't lost in almost 2 years. It's coming up on 2 years that they have not lost a game. We're going to make sure we clip that just so when they do go the full season without losing, we play this back and run this back here.
Are the Cannons a betting favorite? Obviously not. They are the least favorite team to win according to DraftKings. Are they a good bet to put your money down on for a couple shillings? Hey, why not? But I don't know that they'd be my favorite right now, but they are going to surprise a lot of people. I think being an expansion team, they're going to do better than the Water Dogs did last year, and that's no slag on the Water Dogs, but the Water Dogs obviously didn't get Lyle Thompson and Paul Rabel off the hop.
The Water Dogs at plus 900 going into this season, the second lowest odds behind the Cannons, and I really
another
like
good
the
bet
Water Dogs there at plus 900. I think a lot of people do. Obviously, the new look Water Dogs. We've been talking all about them, but we will talk more about the Water Dogs here, I believe, next week sometime. But Austin, I appreciate you joining me as always as we look ahead to training camp in the 2021 season, just under a month away. But today was the Cannons season preview. We will begin following up with the other teams as we go along, starting on Friday. But that is going to do it for today's show here of Goal Line Extended. I want to thank you all for watching and or listening. If you are not already, make sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube as well as on whatever podcast platform that you use. You can also head on over to Lacrosse Flash website, lacrosseflash.com. All of our podcasts are there, as well as Austin's Cannons season preview. Make sure to check that out and keep your eyes out for the other team previews that we will be rolling out in the next few weeks. You can also follow Goal Line Extended on Instagram and Twitter at GL Extended. All of the links that you will need will be in the description of the video or podcast that you're viewing or listening to right now. We will be back on Friday to look ahead to the first round of the NCAA championship, and then another team and guest as we continue our PLL team previews. I hope you all have an incredible week, and we will see you on Friday.
Follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at GL Extended, and subscribe to the show on any of your favorite podcast outlets. You can find Lacrosse Flash on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and online at lacrosseflash.com.